Welcome to Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the fifth dimension.
Welcome to another podcast episode of Merkaba Chakras. I'm your host, Vaughn Galt, and today we talk to neuroscientist and author Dr. Kaushik Ram about how his precognition method transforms our heart field. Now, it is commonly misinterpreted that Buddhism is all about understanding the mind. However, the advanced Buddhist mystics, such as myself and others, have proven in Buddhist Mandalas art history that the heart field is the largest aura field around the teacher, and the halo around the mind is secondary. And so, with that, Dr. Kaushik Ram, welcome to Merkaba Chakras.
Yeah, thank you, Von Galt. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I love these topics, and not to make the mind subservient or less of value to the heart, but there has been a lot of focus on mind and understanding, consciousness through mindfulness. And that's wonderful because that's all that we know how so far in modern medicine to measure. But understanding the heart field and the energy of the heart is, we know it has more energy than the mind field, but we're still learning a lot about how to measure how much of it and how it relates to our consciousness. So this concept of precognition is really interesting to me. So before we get into your research, can you tell us your story for how you even got into this work in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess most people are interested in how I got into it professionally and, how I started neuroscience. But prior to that, I had a near-death experience which triggered this journey in the first place. Before that, I was a biologist. I was studying animal behavior and zoology. And after a near-death experience, I couldn't really avoid the question of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So back then, I was sort of doing animal behavior. I was doing brain surgery on sharks. And from that, I was like, what if I just turned this into a medical degree and study the human brain itself? So
Ah,
that's how it started more than 15 years ago.
well, Dr.
And I guess, prior to even that, I had a lot of, I guess, emotional dysfunctions. And I was a fairly lost kid in the world, trying
Mm-hmm.
to figure out purpose, what my mission was, kind of like what everyone goes through. And after that near-death experience, it became very obvious what my mission was. And I thought it was to understand consciousness itself. But as I dug deeper into it, especially from a neuroscience perspective, I realized that the human brain was only a small part
Mm-hmm.
of the entire, I guess, ecosystem within ourselves. And the heart played a major role in regulating that. So I started understanding, first of all, how the brain and body was connected from a biological perspective. And the more I dug deeper, the more I realized how predominant the heart is in all modulating all the bodily processes. So that's been, I guess, the focus of my research. And I call it precognition because the heart is the first perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it happens before cognition. So it's different from, the typical, I guess, understanding of precognition, which is
Mm-hmm.
premonitions of the future or having a dream state realization, and then something happens in reality. I do make that distinction. For me, precognition is a biological process rather than some form of fantasy related.
Right, right. So let me ask you something, Dr. Koshik. Tell us about your NDE. So what happened? that got you to your near-death experience? And what was the experience like when you went through your NDE?
Yeah, I'll just preface this one as well because for more than, I think, 20 years, 15 years, I have been very reluctant to talk about this one. It's been a very personal experience for me, but uh, I started talking about it a bit more once I had written it down in my book, Hidden World.
Mm-hmm.
And then people became very interested about it. But prior to that, this was a very personal experience.
What now? Why
So
why were you hesitant to share it? I mean, it's a very fascinating experience, and not everybody goes through. So, why did you not want to share it?
so the reason was when I first had this experience, I could not stop talking about it. And I was with a girlfriend at the time, and she got so annoyed by me talking about it all the time that she was like, if you ever talk about this again, I'll leave you. And
Wow, that's the wrong
she left
girlfriend.
me for other reasons, but I stopped talking about it. So that was, early 20s. And, that was quite a significant experience. But yeah, for me, it happened when I was traveling through Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't quite like the tourist hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
So I started island hopping east from Bali to Lombok, through Flores, Komodo Island, and eventually I ended up in the west side of Papua New Guinea, which is called Irian Jaya. And then I decided to head up into the highlands. And when I got there, I had a tour guide who spoke very little English, and he was sort of a 50-year-old middle-aged man, and usually very drunk. And so he was guiding me through the mountains, through underground cave dwellings,
Sounds like a good
suspended
guide.
bridges, all these unique
Yeah.
experiences, and still very remote. Back then in 2009, there were barely like 10 or 12 tourists up there per year. So it's not really where the typical man or woman goes.
Right.
And so I was up in the highlands, and one night I actually got to stay in a little cabin that the missionaries had built in the
Okay.
1800s.
Well,
It
that's
was abandoned. And my tour guide always slept outside, so he slept on the ground. So I was inside this cabin, which was fortified because headhunting and cannibalism was still common back then. And
Oh.
so I got into this cabin, and it felt like, there had been massacres or some,
Oh, so you
really.
felt the energy.
Exactly. And I was only 22, so I had no idea, what I was feeling, but I could even, like, I felt terrified even breathing in that
And
environment.
you slept there? You stayed there? You didn't decide to sleep elsewhere?
I didn't have a choice. I'm in the middle of the forest. That's the only place where there's a bed. And so, yeah, I did make that decision to, okay, stay here. But I didn't know whether there was, spirits or anything like that in that place. That wasn't something I could sense or even contemplate back then. So I stayed in this cabin. Whether it was haunted, I don't know, but I got extremely sick to the point that I thought I was going to die.
Like what
And
is extremely sick? You just felt like nauseating, or you felt like
no,
what?
I felt like my head was about to explode. I was in so much
Okay.
pain. Yeah.
Just from staying in
And
this environment. Okay, interesting.
yeah. So whether it be related to some form of energetics in the environment, I don't actually know. Or could be as simple as me drinking water which had been contaminated.
Yeah.
I don't know the cause of why I got extremely sick,
Right.
but the fact is I was extremely sick inside that cabin. And so the only thing that I knew to alleviate that was meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started going deeper into my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I use a mantra which my dad had often read,
Which one?
when he read scriptures. It's not a chanting mantra. It's not very obvious. It's from the Bhagavad Gita. It's just a Sanskrit sentence called Abhyas se Gyan, Gyan se Dhyan, which means with practice comes knowledge, and with knowledge comes focus. So I decided to practice meditation. And this is, my young sort of 20-year-old mind going, maybe this will help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so because the pain was so extreme, my meditation had to be just as extreme on the opposite end. And so when I dived deep within my own body, I got to a certain point where the physical form disappeared. And so with it, the pain disappeared as well. And when there was no form, there was like no idea of space either. So I didn't have an orientation up, down, left, right.
Mm-hmm.
It was in this state where there was no space.
Right.
And
Mhm.
I went further still. And at a certain point, time disappeared. So
Mhm.
at that point, the mind did abandon that journey because it could not contemplate what I was experiencing. And I went further still, and I could experience everything from, the tiniest electrons moving around a nucleus to galaxies colliding against each other, to everything in between, as if it was going through, the universe at light speed, like everything was experienced at the same time.
Right.
And I don't know how long I was in this experience, but when I did come out of it, the first thing that occurred to me was the fact that I was human. And then the entire history of humankind just occurred to me, going, oh, wow, like we've fought so many wars, we've done so much damage to the planet. I realized, I guess, the burden of being a human on this planet. And so, it took me a long time to, I guess, reintegrate back into humanity. It took at least 5 years from the experience itself to then coming to reality and going, wow, like human beings function a certain way, and they have jobs and responsibilities, and to reacquaint myself with modern existence.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been a long sort of journey of reintegrating back into society after an experience that I still cannot explain.
Right. So let me ask you about that experience, because I'm very familiar with that experience. So you went into you went into a deep meditation state where you enter another level of consciousness where you completely remove yourself from the physical. So you felt like emptiness. And then you completely removed yourself. You went even further, higher up into your consciousness, and removed yourself from your identity. So now you're no longer Dr. Ram. And then went even further into being one with consciousness itself, which is everything within space and time and all of that. So it's even a higher level of understanding. But how is that a near-death experience? Or how is, did somebody come to tell you, did your tour guide come and tell you, hey, we've been trying to resuscitate you and your heart stopped? I mean, how do we know it's not just a deep meditative state, a deep gamma brainwave state of meditation?
First of all, gamma is not a deep meditative state.
What's a deeper state
Uh,
beyond that?
no, so usually meditation is related to the alpha state. And if you fall deeper into, I guess, a more sleep-like state, then that's delta. But gamma is a very spontaneous spike in brain activity.
Mm-hmm.
It's often related to creativity or an epiphany or realization, which happens suddenly in a moment and then disappears. Our brain cannot maintain gamma because it's like a shock wave going
Right.
through the brain.
Right.
So
So you went
yeah,
beyond any kind of known level of understanding consciousness and became everything.
yeah.
Okay. So in that state, how do we know that you actually died? Did you have your, like I said, did you have your tour guide come and tell you, hey, we've been trying to resuscitate you? Or, how do you know it was death versus just, getting into a very deep state of consciousness through the meditation method that you did?
To be honest, I don't know.
You don't know. Okay.
No one came into the room. I was there by myself. I thought I was going to die. I, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, wrote a letter to my parents going, maybe I'll not make it through tonight. And, like, sorry for being young and foolish and, constantly going on random adventures. Maybe this one would have cost me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
in my mind, I had accepted the fact that I might not come out of this one.
Right. Right. So, so you had come back and you had this understanding of all of human existence. And what are and so the wars and all the feuding that we do in human history, that was what kind of caught what kind of imprinted that you remembered, or was there any other things that was unique that you also remembered that really stuck with you still?
No, I mean, when I did return back to reality,
Mm-hmm.
everything that I described happened in an eye blink. So it's not that I started remembering human history. No,
Mm-hmm.
it was such a, like, everything happened all at once. And
Mm-hmm.
there is no, like, me trying to remember anything.
Mm-hmm. It's just a knowing.
So
It's a knowing. Was it like a knowing?
yeah,
Like you just
yeah,
like
and
like
it,
you
it
you
just
know.
happened so quickly. So and once it had happened, I didn't really go back and think about it.
Mm-hmm.
What did remain was that experience where I had gone somewhere beyond the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I dedicated the rest of my life to then find a way to uh, get back to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, I've never been able to recreate that experience. But
Oh, really? Okay.
yes, yeah. And I mean, I've tried everything from, like, all sorts of psychedelic, you know, substances, plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing even remotely comes close to what I'd experienced. So if that's your reference point, and you then go and try, various other forms of meditation,
Right.
and other activities, your reference point is different if you haven't had that experience, and
Right.
then you know
No, I know.
uh,
I know.
yeah.
So, okay, so you came back to your body and you slept through the night in this I don't know, room or this hut. So, so nothing happened to your body, right? Or were you still sick when you woke up?
No, I wasn't sick at all. So
Okay,
when I
good.
woke up, I was completely fine. I don't know how long I was in that state.
Mm.
um, yeah, not, like, absolutely no idea. It could have been that day, could have been 2 days. I actually don't know.
Well, what did the tour guide say? Because he slept outside.
Yeah, so all of that it's kind of a blur to me. I don't even
Really?
remember going to the airport to fly back to Sydney. It was such a blur after that experience.
Mm. Okay, so you adjusted back into the game. So you came back into your body, you came back into the world, and you basically sit yourself back into your storyline, your avatar. So now you're back into society, and you said it took you 5 years to reintegrate. What was the hardest parts about reintegrating after this experience? Because experience is now part of you. You can't undo it. So,
Yeah, I guess the most challenging part has been realizing that that is a very personal experience, and not everyone will relate to it. And especially in the environments that I work in academia,
mm.
it's immediately dismissed. And so
Why is that?
well, they don't know any different, right? They haven't had that experience, so they don't have a reference point. So they're coming from their own biases and judgments, and you can't really expect everyone to understand what you have gone through. Like, as I say, it is a very personal experience, and not everything can be explained. I don't even try to explain that experience.
Yeah.
It's and to expect other people to think the way you do, or see the world that you do, is an error in your own judgment, really. Everyone is unique in the way that they experience life.
Yeah, so it's like falling in love. You can talk about falling in love, but it's something that you have to experience yourself in order to really understand what it feels like to be in love.
Yes, exactly.
So so what my question is, how did much of humanity let go of their egos, to let their egos hijack their brains and then reject the intelligence of the heart? Because the work that you went into was to study the heart and the effects of the heart in terms of precognition. So let's talk about your work. So as you were doing this, you had discovered your concept of the precognition method. So define to people, what is precognition, first of all, before we go into application and everything else.
Yeah, so it's a very simple concept. It's the ability of the heart to perceive reality before anything else does. And in a real world sense, that's, changes in your heart rate, changes in your metabolic rate, changes in the energy distribution between organ systems, pupil dilation, sweating in the palms, like all of these changes happen before even information reaches the subconscious. And then the subconscious picks up what the body is sensing, and then decides what information is relevant to then deliver to our conscious perception. So that process has a bit of a time lag. And so when I say precognition, it is the bodily processes, especially relating to the heart. Changes in the heart rate is what we call heart rate variability. So all those things happen prior to our conscious perception.
Right.
We live in a world where we think with our heads, and we direct our body from the head, from the mind. And because this happens from a very young age, we start relating to our environment, and we see ourselves as this is me and that is outside me. And that's where we make that distinction between who I am and what I'm not. And then also we might have some form of possessiveness. This is mine. This relates to me. This is my, storyline. This is my work. This is
Right.
my,
Identifiers
so
is what I
those
call
are
them.
extensions of
Yeah.
me. So because we create that, we start interacting with the world based on our perception. However, when we look at the heart and how that responds, a lot of how the heart is responding through is just moment to moment. So inherently, it is responding to the now. And the mind has this habit of traveling into the past or future to interact with the world. So,
Right.
Yeah, that, like, for me, because I have mapped that entire process between brain and body, what I do is I teach people to incept the process at various different levels to be able to work from the heart. So depending on how, I guess, mature the person is in, the personal development world, they might not need some of the techniques, or they might need to start from the very beginning. And depending on where they are, we incept their nervous system at a particular stage so that that brain-body connection is established. And then once that is there, the mind is no longer leading. The heart now has the opportunity to take over.
Right. Let me ask you something about the heart. Another question about the heart. So, let me get your opinion or your perspective on this. So, let's say somebody is, okay, I'll give you an example. We're looking for a dog. Okay, we're looking for a dog for the family, and we haven't really found the dog, and we go to the shelter, and we don't really feel a connection with any one of them. But let's say there's a my husband did this with our previous dog. He went to the shelter and the dog came up, our dog Fairies. He came up out of all the other dogs, came up to the gate, sat there, ready to go, and just kind of, wagged his tail and smiled like, I'm ready to go. And my husband, boyfriend at the time, walked up, looked at the dog, and was like, oh, there you are. And there was just an instant connection. But he didn't even think about anything else like, oh, this dog is bigger than what we were gonna get. This dog is, a little older than what originally wanted. All those mind talkings of analytics was not in the decision making process. It was completely heart based, like, oh, I feel a connection with this dog. I really feel like this is my dog, and the dog, back and forth. So, where does that impulse of knowing come from? Does it come from non-local consciousness, or does it come from your own your own ego consciousness? Where does that signal come from that tells the heart, yes, this is the dog, this is the one that we're looking for? Because all the mind stuff was not in the decision making. So, can you talk about that example?
Yeah, so I would really equate that to intuition. And where does intuition come from? I actually don't know. Similar to where do thoughts come from? I don't actually know. I know they're manufactured through the synapses of the brain, but where does it actually come from and how is it fabricated? I don't know. So similar with intuition. But it does rely quite heavily on the brain-body connection. So people who are very intuitive are very connected with their hearts. And often when, people say, I actually don't know what you're talking about, I actually give them an exercise to do, which is, so we'll use your example of choosing a dog. What I would do in that case is, say there's two dogs that I need to choose between. I'll imagine what it feels like to be with one of the dogs with full conviction and see how my body is responding to that.
Right.
Rather than what I'm cognitively thinking about. So just observing the bodily processes. Does it feel expansive? Do you feel relaxed when you think about it, do you feel warm? Do you feel affection? And then letting go of that experience completely, and then giving the other dog just as much conviction, and then observing what's happening in the body. And you might find one has more affinity than the other. And I'm just talking about body. I'm not talking about what the dog looks like,
Right.
or, you know, I'm not observing the dog itself. I'm observing what's happening within my own physiology.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that standpoint, regardless of, you know, which dog it is, I simply go with the one that feels quite expansive within myself. And, you
Right.
know, the heart always has a way of knowing that. And quite often you realize the consequences of that outcome in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in the moment, you might not be able to explain it. It might even feel illogical or irrational. And I
Right.
often say intuition is quite often counterintuitive because it goes against what the mind wants.
Right. And that
And
is so true. That is so true, because let me expand further on that. So in terms of what the mind or mind ego says it wants and what the heart really wants. You know, it's just like that Roxette 80s song, Listen to Your Heart. But you know, with regards to the story of the dog, I'll give you a different story as well. And this is a very common one when it comes to matters of the heart and listening to that intuition from the heart. And what you're saying, and let me get this straight as well, is that the heart immediately has um, an impulse decision on something. It already made a decision on something, whatever the decision is in that situation. It already made a decision. And then if you are tuned into your heart and you're tuned into your body, then your heart is going to send the signal to your body, and then your whole body system is going to respond naturally to the signals coming out of the heart. And eventually you're going to start thinking ways in which to justify what your heart wants. And that is a unified harmonic body. Whereas somebody who doesn't listen to the intuition, doesn't listen to the gut, their heart, whatever you want to call it, starts thinking other alternative thoughts or logic to try to justify another perspective. And they go with that. And then later on, they regret it because it wasn't really what they wanted. And they knew all along that they didn't listen to the heart. So that's the two choices that people typically make, and the one where they're not listening to their heart, they're not listening to the gut, they're not listening to the intuition about something. They're just going with the story of their mind, their ego, everybody else. It usually backfires on them because then they're unhappy, and then their body typically will start developing ailments to let them know that it's not happy with its current state of affairs. So what I found is that when people don't listen to their higher self about discord in their life, their bodies start to manifest ailments to let the person know that they are stressed. So what is your experience with people who don't listen to their heart, and how does that affect their body?
yeah, this is something that I love talking about because it's so apparent.
Huh?
And you know, the connection between brain and body, between the heart and the mind, is actually measurable. We call it vagal tone in science. And so when someone has low vagal tone, there's all sorts of ailments, mental, physical, and physiological. And you know, there's been various studies done on how to heighten that vagal tone and how
Mm-hmm.
it responds in medical cases. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a study in the Netherlands where they implanted a device on the neck which
Mm-hmm.
stimulated the vagus nerve
Mm-hmm.
for people who had rheumatoid arthritis. And so, by stimulating the vagus nerve, um, the inflammation, and rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease. Uh, the inflammation disappeared and the nervous system naturally restored balance. And so the rheumatoid arthritis was gone as long as the vagus nerve was being stimulated. So that's one example. It's also been used for treatment response to depression and chronic fatigue syndrome, so mental conditions as well.
Right.
So I do agree with you there that, when people do go against their heart's desire, because now there's a conflict happening between brain and body that creates resistance in functioning in your daily reality.
Right.
Because now you're in two minds, right?
Yeah.
Or in other words, there's a conflict between the heart and the mind. And so that resistance later on leads into dysfunctions. So it's similar to, the body sending a signal saying, hey, I am tired. And a person's typical response would be, I'll need more coffee. So they take a coffee. And so the heart rate rises, the metabolic state rises, the body thinks it's in fight or flight. But when in actual fact, what was needed was, I feel tired.
Right.
So I need to get some rest. And when I close my eyes, the body goes into the parasympathetic state. It gets the rest that it needs. The body finds its own harmony, and then it balances the nervous system, healing, and there's all these hormones that are regulated when your body is in the parasympathetic state. Human growth factor. There's all this regeneration that happens. So when you deny the body of that, so first of all, you're feeling tired and you didn't listen to it, and you took a coffee. So now you're in this fight or flight state, and you're matching, your state with what the environment is doing, which is usually some form of chaos. And so in that state, the body might give you another signal going, okay, like now I'm in a panic state. And, so progressively, the body starts giving more and more signals. And if we keep ignoring it, the body at a certain point shuts down. And that's like a catatonic state, or a state of shock, or fatigue, or trauma. And the body was speaking all along, but we weren't listening.
Yeah.
So
And
eventually
it just gets worse and worse.
So so magnified.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, in terms of another very, very common experience that many people have when it comes to matters of the heart. So let's say somebody is, I'll take your example of a client I had. They had, my client had been with her boyfriend for a very long time, for almost 8 years, I guess. And she really wanted to get married and have kids, and tried for many, many years to cross that threshold and go take the relationship to another experience. And when she finally said, had enough and said, okay, if we don't do this, I'm going to move on and give myself an opportunity to fall in love with somebody else and, get married and have kids, because that's the experience I want. I don't want to cheat myself out of that experience that I want. And her companion at the time thought about it and thought about it. Remember, they've been together 8 years. Thought about it, and he could not make himself, or he could not get over the hurdle of getting married and having kids. And at the very end of it, when push came to shove, he said, I just don't want to do that with you. So it was very heartbroken, but she had moved on, and she had fallen in love with somebody else. And she is a stepmom now to 3 wonderful children who love her, and she has that opportunity to be a mother. But the opportunity to have her own biological children had completely passed because she had spent so much time trying and waiting for her ex-companion at the time to get over his fear or his hurdle. So my question to you is this. She had known, and it's very common, she had known for a very, very long time because her heart kept telling her that he cares about you. And in essence, he does love you as much as you love him. But he does not love you like that to want to have that experience with you in terms of marriage and children. So you need to love yourself more and move on and give yourself a better opportunity with somebody else to have that experience. But she never listened to it, and she never listened to it. And he never listened to his gut that he knew all along too. So they had spent all this time knowing exactly that they were supposed to be a temporary couple for just maybe a couple years for dating, but they were supposed to move on. And and that's what happened in that relationship. He eventually moved on. He got married a year later with somebody else that his heart was just pitter patter for, that he just fell head over heels for, and also got pregnant. So this happens very often, and this is a very common matter of the heart. So what is your experience working with people who have these common matters of the heart where they don't listen to their heart with regards to their companion that they choose to stay with or not stay with?
Mm. So I guess, I mean, first of
Yeah, how do we
all,
listen to our heart better is the
yeah,
question. So we can avoid that suffering.
yeah. So there's various forms of love, right? There's agape, unconditional love, and love of self.
Mhm.
Um, and that's, I guess, what we should all be working on, regardless of whether we're with someone or not. Um, that I feel is accessible to everyone, regardless of circumstance. So that's one thing. There's philia, which is, you have a sense of connection with other people, whether it be friends, family, your tribe, like
Mhm.
the people who you love and want to hang out with. So that's another form of love. And you need that oxytocin boost from your tribe. You need that dopamine hit, when you
Right.
guys do things together. And, that it's really essential for hormonal regulation. Um, and then there's the romantic love. And there's so many complexities of, what happens within a relationship. And
Mhm.
so I tend not to give subjective advice on, like the relationship you described. There would have been so many push and pull scenarios in that relationship, and there's so many layers of,
Mhm.
complexity within those push pull dynamics. So I it, it is a very common thing. I do get
It
that.
is common.
Yeah. And I want to, perhaps this might help people, which is to recognize which stage your life partner is in.
Mm.
So for example, for a
Mhm.
man, he might be in a stage where he's going out into the world trying to uh, get a name for himself, build himself a foundation. And when a woman enters at that
Mhm.
phase, uh, it's a, the guy is still trying to discover himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's priorities a little bit different. When a man has established himself and a woman enters at that stage and she too is established in her own form of security,
Mhm.
then they can think differently of how they can, I guess, progress the relationship, whether it's marriage, kids, getting a house. All those factors are different.
Mhm.
What we find in society today is so many people are looking for things that are outside their life stage. They might be still trying to establish themselves,
Right.
and they're trying to be in a relationship and have kids, and
Right.
trying to, have financial security and all of that. So it's such a complicated mix where, and you got to respect certain people come into your life to meet you at the life stage you're in. And once
Yeah.
you've moved past that life stage, that person, if they haven't transformed as well, then they might need a different experience to get them there. You can't
Yeah.
stay around with the same person,
Yeah.
and so it is a very complex scenario.
Yeah. I
And
just get this image. I just get from what you're saying, I just get this image. You know how you have like two cars on the road. So here's you and here's your mate, or your companion. And you have two cars on the road and you meet up at the time that you met up, you're on the same lane. So you're going through on the same lane. However, you knew that you were going to take the freeway at some point to go to a different destination. And that person doesn't want to take that. And so you just stay hovering around the same pattern. And then it, it gets to a point where you either have to decide you're no longer going to take that path, you're no longer going to take the freeway and veer off to that other destination that you know you want to experience, and stay in this lane with this person who's not ever going to go there, or and be fine with. So at some point when you realize that you're no longer dating in the same lane anymore, you have to cut it off and move on. Is that what I'm hearing? Because that's kind of what I'm getting from you. At some point you
yeah, and
outgrow each
it's often
other.
I understand that that can be very difficult because you've invested
8
hopes,
years.
dreams, intentions, and emotionally as well. So it can be quite a
Hmm.
grieving process, but
Yeah.
it can be done quite beautifully as well. You
And how do you
can.
do it beautifully? How do you use your heart consciousness to break or cut ties with a relationship, whether it's romantic or in a work scenario, or or a friendship that no longer really is satisfactory to you, whatever the relationship is. How does one use their heart intelligence to realize that, one, they have outgrown this relationship and it's really not serving them in any way, and or holding them back, and two, once they make that decision that they have outgrown each other, how do they make that transition in the most peaceful and beautiful way?
Yes, I've become very clear
Hmm.
within myself. So when it comes to these scenarios, I can make that call,
Okay.
because I don't have ambiguity around myself, so I can be very clear and make those decisions with conviction.
Hmm.
So whether it be in a relationship, um, it gets to a point where it does not work, and at that point, I do sit my partner up,
Hmm.
and we do go over where the relationship is at,
Hmm.
and quite often there's a mutual understanding because it is coming and communicated through the heart, and whether it's agreed upon or not, you can't deny the fact that what, what's happening is real.
Yeah.
So it is coming, and I do sometimes make a little ceremony around it,
Oh,
to
that's a good
acknowledge the
way.
fact
Yeah.
that we did have a beautiful time together, and now as you said, we going into different directions,
Hmm.
and that's quite beautiful. um it works great when there's not that much emotional investment. If it's a purely physical thing, then it's much easier.
Yeah,
But
but
when
what if you have emotional, because you built that emotional connection for so long, they just don't want to, take the relationship to like another level, like, let's move in together, or let's have a child, or let's adopt a child, or let's get a dog together, any of these other elements, in terms of how you create your reality that expands on your relationship, these becoming
yeah,
defining moments on relationships. So,
yeah, and so there, like, if you have gone to the extent of investing so much time in someone,
mhm,
um, you know, this is especially common amongst kids today. I mean, I live in Bondi Beach in Sydney,
Mm,
and
beautiful.
everyone looks great. Health and fitness, and a long-term relationship here is 3 months.
It's 3 months. That's like a 90-day work review.
Yeah, exactly. And most people don't pass probation, you know? And so the fact of the matter is we live in a cancel culture
Oh, that's
where,
hilarious. Why
you
is
know,
that? Why is that? Why is it so short term? Because you don't really get, you know, you don't
yeah,
build those
you
strong
don't go
bonds.
into the deep waters, you just stay in the
Uh-huh.
shallows.
Uh-huh.
And when the thing is, a lot of times people are not equipped with, how to navigate a relationship. Instead, it's so much easy to just uh, break up and move on, find the next best thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is happening is they're not really establishing a emotional feedback loop. They
Mm-hmm.
don't understand what a secure attachment feels like. They don't
Mm-hmm.
really understand uh, how much like commitment it takes to actually have a functional relationship. Everyone, like
Describe that.
regardless of,
Describe that. Because that requires what you just said is the commitment to have a functional relationship, in my opinion, requires consistent, because we're talking about the matters of the heart and listening to the heart. That requires a patterning, a regular patterning where you have a flow with, the energetics between you and somebody else. And it's your natural state. It's your natural state. So in the discussion of the young people who break up every 3 months in your neighborhood, um, they never really. It doesn't seem like they really get to a point where there's a natural equilibrium in their relationships. And so, how do they do that? How do these young people learn to have what I call um, long, fruitful romantic relationships that turn into life partners, and even so with their friends that have what we call lifetime friends. So, they don't know these concepts, but there's a aspect of creating patterns and creating bonds that build out those type of roots. So how can people who aren't familiar with how to do this start doing this using their heart field or their heart intelligence?
you nailed it there. It does begin with your own heart. And most people, I feel that they are escaping uh, from their heart
Mm,
because they've been hurt once and they don't want to be
mm,
hurt again. And
mhm, mhm,
so that alone means that regardless of which relationship they fall in, they
mhm.
will always run away from it because they aren't returning back to their own heart. So they're incapable of loving themselves, let alone someone else. And so
Yeah.
that is, our core condition that is driving so many, I guess, uh, dating schemes that are out there.
Oh,
But
yeah, I know. I see those. I see them online. It's quite fascinating to see how, um, let's say the concept of online dating international, and there are some people who meet their spouse or their loves through mail order brides, for example. But there are also scams that go on as well, and I have come across that as well, where I had a friend who really, really fell for somebody in that um, online mail order bride avenue. And all their friends and family were saying this is all templated. All these email responses are templated. It's not even answering your question. It's just, well, respond with template 5, and then, oh, with this answer, respond with template 10 or whatever. And eventually he got burned. He realized it wasn't really genuine, and he stopped doing that. He was one of the lucky ones. But there's a lot of people who fall for these dating scams, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's on an app or whether it's on a website. I mean, and it makes it even harder to listen to your heart conscious when they're not physically present with you, where you can't, feel that energy in the room when they're in there. So how does one use their heart intelligence when it comes to making connections over the internet? So it is a genuine connection and not a scam.
Yeah, I mean, my solution to that is don't use any of the apps at all, because there's a critical thing that is missing in there, right?
Mhm.
The very human connection, and you can't really do that with an app.
Yeah.
And just the fact that when a man approaches a woman on the street, there is this approach anxiety that happens. There's this you're not swiping left or right with no emotional feedback.
Yeah.
You are reading how that person is responding, and there's fear of rejection. There's an excitement that happens there as well, the exhilaration of getting someone's number. All of these things are so essential, because what actually is happening is the younger generation are not learning how to play with tension. So if you can't
Yeah.
create tension in a relationship and you've done it through an app, where is that sexual tension in the first place? Is it in the
Yeah.
algorithm?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you can't skip these processes, because when you do end up in bed and you can't create sexual tension, and I'm talking about positive sexual tension, then like it becomes dysfunctional, because neither guy or girl is having their needs met.
Yeah.
So to be able to do that, first of all, you will need ways of managing your own anxiety, how
Right.
to approach someone, how to interact when you are approached. So all of these things are so important. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is that you cannot love in a hurry. And what I
Yes.
mean by that is, when we're in a constant state of fight or flight, we're running around. How is it even possible to have a heart-to-heart connection when you're in fear?
Right.
Like, those two states cannot coexist. So when you are in the parasympathetic state and you connect with someone, then there's a space for love to unfold. And in today's society, we take the next coffee, we run around with so many to-do lists. Like, where is the opportunity for love?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, there's a very enormous part of human of the human experience that people are
Yeah.
missing out on. And because they're missing out on that very connection, they go around looking for it. And like, guys that have their thumbs bleeding from swiping right, you know and getting no responses. Like, isn't it so much easier to just approach someone real?
Yeah. And even if you get rejected, you have more fun doing it because you're
Exactly.
actually, you're actually in the game. It is so funny. I get a lot of millennial clients, for my hypnosis. And one of the common things is, how do I attract my love? How do I attract, like, somebody that I really am going to be jazzed about? And when I ask them, they're like, well, I Twitter her, and then we Twitter, we Facebook. I met her on Facebook. We Twitter. I swiped, and I did, and I'm like, well, have you talked to her? Like, and they're like, well, so I'll text her. And I'm like, no, we gotta talk though. So then it becomes less about that. So then we just end up having the rest of the session of the consultation going, let's role play how you talk to women and how you take rejection politely, and how you get back in the game, and how it's okay to feel, like you were saying, a little anxiety, a little tension, a little, wet, cold palms or warm palms or whatever. So these are normal things that's happening to your body, because it's how your body is communicating with, like what you said, that signal in your heart that says, go for it. So you're listening to that signal in your heart, like, of all the women that you see in whatever the setting, you picked out the one that you really were interested in, and now you want to try to engage and have a conversation, or make conversation somehow. And now you're going to go for it. But all these different things that you were describing in terms of your body reacting, that is your body lining up and listening to your heart intelligence is telling you, okay, you got to go for it. Now, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's totally fine. It's part of the process anyways. You're just getting training for the next one. Oh, I think that's really key for a lot of young people dating, because there is a lot of dating hesitancy, and these apps, although they make it easy to introduce people, you still have to do the work and get to know them. I met my husband through an online website called Match, and we've been together almost 15 years. But after the initial messaging and talking on the phone, we went on a date, and we still had to date. We still had to get to know each other. We still had to learn about each other, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing these apps and these online sites do when it comes to this matter of the heart is just presents you your options of people in your area based on your criteria, whatever that criteria is. But then afterwards, it's almost kind of like matchmakers. They're matchmakers. Afterwards, you still have to get to know them and pursue the relationship, and that takes some refinement and some skills to work on that relationship on an everyday basis, to get that equilibrium, that constant state, whatever that state of. Some people's relationship state is high volatile all the time, and that's their normal. So um uh, some people like that. If it becomes too peaceful, they don't like it, they break up, whatever that's about. But for many people, just uh, they enjoy relationships that are much more peaceful, much more harmonic, much more just enjoyable and pleasant. So whatever your natural harmonics is, in your heart, you're going to naturally attract somebody else that is of that similar frequency, and then you guys will synergize together. So that goes to my next question for you. So one of the biggest lies much of humanity has believed is that they are separate from one another. Okay. So it's easy to love a kind and compassionate person. However, how can people love a cruel person? Okay. Somebody who's been really cruel to them.
Mm.
Difficult question for the heart.
There is, I do understand compassion and forgiveness, and quite often there's a lot of merit to it. Uh, you know, it could be a relationship between, a mother or daughter. Could be a relationship between a daughter and a dad, or a dad and a son. We can forgive ancestral wounds that are passed on generation to generation. We can forgive other people because they are interacting with the world through their own experiences, their own wounds, times that they have been hurt and no one was there to support them. And so they tend to react in a certain way based on, how their wounds are being triggered. So all these cases, no one is really rude on purpose. It's just, what they haven't actually found peace with their past within themselves. So it comes out in the now. So in that sense, I can have compassion for people. I can
Right.
forgive. But in another sense, there has to be boundaries. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be with family members, it can be with friends, it can be with work colleagues, whoever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's boundaries have got nothing to do with fear or protecting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It is coming out of love. It is coming out of self-respect, going, hey,
Right.
that is not appropriate.
It's
Or,
self-love.
hey,
It's self-love or self-compassion. Yeah.
exactly. So dealing with, say someone who is bullying someone else,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just keep being bullied. You can't keep surrendering. You can't just let someone walk all over you.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what is required in that moment is for you to stand up for yourself and go, hey, you can't do that. And
Right.
set your boundaries. So it is very circumstance dependent. Uh, and for that reason, like I do work with the heart a lot, because for me, uh, when I say high vagal tone or high heart rate variability, it's the ability of the heart to really accelerate into like a fight or flight stage,
Mm-hmm.
and then decelerate just as quickly. That is high heart rate variability.
Right.
So if someone has low heart rate variability, danger or threat may present itself, but because they have a low heart rate variability, they can't excite themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They might be at a party and someone might approach them and try to create a bit of excitement, but because their heart rate can't go into that excitement level, that
Right.
chemistry is lost. Or if someone has again low heart rate variability but not low heart rates, the heart rate is still very high.
Mm-hmm.
Variability is low because they can't come back down. And so now they're really anxiety. Someone approaches them, they go in panic. Oh my God, like who is this person, talking to me? Like what do they want from me, and all this kind of stuff. So suddenly, you can see how neither extreme is good. When you have high heart rate variability, it means you can go switch between all those states seamlessly. And that is what is required when you do come across different scenarios where if you are being bullied, hey, you can stand up and go, hey, man, that is not cool.
Yeah.
Or if someone comes to you and they're sharing, offloading their emotion on you, and then you can go, okay, I can see where you're coming from. And there's empathy, there's connection, there's compassion going,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. I might have behaved some way, but you may have misinterpreted this. And so we can open those lines of communication through compassion.
Yeah.
So it's always very circumstance dependent.
Right. Right. Very, very good, because that is the same line of logic in Buddhism. In Buddhism, we really discuss the concept of compassion, and compassion also includes not only compassion for others, in understanding or working, helping them with their suffering, whatever they're working on. But it also includes compassion for yourself. But in the English language, there is no definition, there's no word for self-compassion. It's just compassion is just for others, but there's nothing for self. And in Buddhism, there is compassion for self. You must have compassion for yourself first before you are able to have compassion for others, which means in a situation where there are cruel people who are doing cruel things to you or cruel things to others, let's take the example of the bully. If you have self-compassion for yourself, you are going to respect yourself. You are going to take care of yourself, and by to do that, you are going to create those healthy boundaries to let others know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and in terms of engaging with you. And when you practice discernment to know the difference, discernment and boundaries are very, very essential when it comes to understanding compassion and mindfulness in the concept of samsara in Buddhism, is that when you understand the difference between the two in that situation, then you create your boundaries. And by creating those boundaries, through understanding discernment of, should I, shouldn't I, which option should I do? Those Creating those boundaries is actually not only giving compassion to yourself, but is also giving compassion to the bully, because now you've stopped the bully from going further into being even more cruel. Because the more you don't do something and you allow the bully to continue to be cruel to you and others, the more they are going to continue to suffer through harming everyone else, because everyone else is connected and their brain and their body can't tell a difference if they're hurting others or hurting themselves, because it's still going to have the same negative effects on their body. And they've already proved this in science. So by not doing anything, you actually not only hurt yourself, but you also hurt the bully by letting them continue to get worse and worse and worse and degenerate because no one stopped them. So you guys could all learn the lesson and move forward, by setting those early boundaries. This reminds me of something that happens a lot in the playground. I'm not sure if it happened to you, but I see this a lot in the playground, and you especially see this with boys, because I'm a parent and I watch a lot of kids play. My kids, but the boys play different from the girls. The boys, if they don't like each other, they're gonna start kind of hitting each other and bullying each other. But the minute somebody stops them and says no, and they stand up for themselves, all of a sudden they stop picking on each other and they become friends. Instantly just become friends. It happens all the time in the playground, boys fighting, and then afterwards they talk it out, and then they become friends. Girls, on the other hand, are a little more sophisticated in how they have discord. They play a little bit more mind games. Okay, there's a little bit more verbal when it comes to the discussion. They'll say mean things to each other, and then it'll take a little bit of time for them to talk it out. They got to talk it out, and try to understand each other. But when they do, they become really, really good friends, and it creates a new bond. Like the bully and the person being bullied become friends, and there's like this bond that they have, because now the person that was bullied stood up for themselves to the bully and also forgave them. And the bully realize that this is not who they are, and they don't want to be like this, and they're only like this because of personal issues that are happening in their personal life. So and so now the bully and the person being bullied now see each other from the other side, and see each other suffering, and see each other's humanity, or see each other's lifestyles, and they have compassion and empathy for each other. So oftentimes what I found is, when you're in a situation where you have somebody who's been very cruel to you, it is an opportunity to rectify that, um, and find that love energy. So let me ask you this. So do you have a last message for people who are wanting to listen to their heart more in their life, so that they can build kind of a more fifth dimensional or much higher reality to live in?
Yeah, so my entire ethos is built on listening to the heart, and just to make it really, really simple, that is the only decision you ever have to listen to. What your heart says in the moment, not tomorrow, not what it decided yesterday, simply in this moment. And similar to how I described, you know, dealing with intense scenarios, or scenarios which require your empathy or your presence, all of it is governed by the heart, depending on whether it's rising or decelerating. So in any given moment, if you simply listen to your heart, your decision processes become so much more simplified. And it's the difference between, say, I'm confronted with something. Maybe it's an employee who comes up with, trouble or work-related issue. And in that case, I could simply find a quick fix solution saying, hey, you just work around this or do this. Or if my heart rate is low, I have all the time in the world to listen to what they're saying, to look at all different angles and go, okay, this is what is happening. And then I can create a roadmap for a long-term solution. So it can happen with someone, it can happen with you individually as well. If your heart rate is really high and you're constantly faced with problems, you will go for the quick fix solutions, because once the heart rate rises, your thinking becomes very linear and goal directed, fight or flight. How do I attack the problem? This is very common in language, especially amongst the working population. Or how do I run away from the problem? How do I run away from this relationship? Or like the decisions don't have to be so instantly gratifying. Instead, when you listen to your heart and your heart rate is low, you have all the time in the world to consider all possibilities and then make a very informed decision. And when you start doing this, it creates long-term fulfillment, because you have gone through ups and downs. You have, overcome so many challenges by being compassionate. And then when you look back, you go, wow, like I feel really good about, the decisions that I've made, compared to, quick fire decisions. And then you look back and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, So that's the message I want to leave people with. It is so simple to simply listen to your heart.
Yeah. And you're going to be in the 2021 Higher Self Expo in a couple of weeks. So are you going to be talking about the Precognition Method? Is that what you're going to be presenting at the Higher Self Expo, or?
Yes. So it will be about the Precognition Method and the anatomy of love. So for the most part, I feel like love has so many different connotations to it. And for that reason, we don't really have a language to talk about it. And so just, talking about it from a biological perspective, and giving an insight of the anatomy of love, that's that would be the intention behind the talk.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good talk. Well, Dr. Kaushik Ram, thank you for offering to teach the Precognition Method. The debate is over, everyone. In every beat of our hearts, we send out love energy. So what kind of love are you sending out right now? That's what you always have to ask. So for more information about Dr. Kaushik Ram's books and courses, please go visit his website, which is drkaushikram.com. And Kaushik is Kaushik ram.com. And then look out for him and his presentation at the Higher Self Expo in July. The website for that is higherselfexpo.com. So it's going to be a lot of great speakers, including Dr. Ram. So thank you kindly to our listeners for listening to another enlightening conversation. Until next time, blessings.
Wonderful.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the fifth dimension. For more information about today's guest, please go to the show description. For more information about Vaughn's metaphysical work, please go to merkabachakras.com. The views expressed today are for entertainment purposes and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or replace any medical or legal advice. Don't forget to subscribe for more interviews about the fifth dimension. Until we meet again, blessings.